Um, Thank you for being one of the founders of Partners in Promise and for adding your expertise as a special education attorney to this conversation, but also just sharing your personal stories, which that's, what we're here about, just to kind of elevate those stories so that we can better educate our community.
It just became very difficult to get IEP teams to listen to me. Even though I was very well versed in my son's disabilities, even though I had read up on one of his disabilities is a condition called persistent hyperplastic primary vitreous, which is very rare. It impacts less than 1% of the population. I knew it up and down and knew what could happen and knew the impact that type of, it's kind of neurological glitch, for lack of a better word. That's literally what it says in his record. It says glitch. And I understood that better than the IEP team because none of them had ever encountered a child with this type of disability. And yet time and again, my voice was marginalized and minimized. And I was just told to trust them. Just trust us. We know we're educators.
Yeah.
But the truth of the matter was that they were not actually addressing all of my son's needs according to his disabilities. It was more about an administrative convenience. And since Josiah was much easier to handle than some of their other students, it was very easy to put the cute little Asian kid, in a corner with like a toy. I am exaggerating because of course, they did provide him some instruction. But really for a good portion of my son's education, it was up to us to pay for, to do on our own. And I did. I paid for tutors, I paid for therapies and services. And, I'm thankful that I was able to afford those, but fact of the matter is not everyone can. And we started to, again, have to really sort of fight for those services. And that's when I began attending law school. Because listen, if you're not going to pay attention to a mom who is well-versed, educated, and has multiple degrees, then I guess I'll have to become the lawyer that you listen to. And also, of course, I'm not just my son's attorney. I was thinking about the other families who I've encountered, both in the military context as well as in the civilian context, who struggle with getting schools and teachers to listen to the story of what their child needs.
Is there something you can do as an advocate, as a parent who isn't necessarily hoping to avoid, having to file legal complaints or hiring a lawyer, or what can we do to either try to work with the school districts and also be an advocate in the earlier stages of the process? Is there?
Yes. First of all, I would not withhold any information from the IEP team. I know there's a lot of lack of trust. There's a lot of protectiveness that's natural. That comes natural to us as parents, because of course we want to protect our children, both in their physical and emotional selves, but also in terms of their information, their health information, their medical documentation.
Yeah.
But you'll have a very difficult time claiming that the school failed to act if they were not aware. And unfortunately, a parent telling the team typically is not enough. You have to then provide the documentation for it. What that means is you need to be as objective as possible when you're speaking with any individuals who are working with your kids. Like, you can't tell that individual, that the school is evil and their teachers are idiots. Don't do that. I would say, just when you're dealing with your child and their disabilities, I know it's hard because it's the most personal thing in the world, but you need to try to be as objective as possible when you're looking at the situation. And sometimes it helps just to talk to a friend who may have that more analytical and objective mindset, to kind of, make sure that what you're saying both to the IEP team and the school district, as well as to private providers, is objective and based solely on your child's needs. When you are dealing with IEP teams and IEPs, you have to recognize that, I wish I had a document to hold up, that the document itself is what we call a portable document, meaning if you were to PCS to a different duty station, that document is what goes with you. So you don't want a document that is so individualized to that school and is based upon issues with that teacher or issues with that principal. When you get to the new school, they look at it and they can't understand what it is your child actually needs or what the issues are. So my recommendation is, to the greatest extent possible, when you're dealing with IEP teams and maybe schools and principals and teachers who may not necessarily, I hate to say like your kid, but this happens so often.
Yeah.
There is that level of, this is a problem student. The student is costing us a lot of time, energy, and money. This is a problem parent. This parent is costing us a lot of time, energy, and money. That you want to make sure that you don't blame an individual person on your child's lack of education. Instead, recognize that every person who works for a school district is representative of that entire school district. And what I mean by that is this: if you go after a teacher because they're a bad teacher, and unfortunately, even with some of the most excellent teachers out there in the world, we do have some teachers who are not that great at educating children with disabilities. I'm sure they're good at other things, but they may not be that great with teaching your child with disabilities. If you focus on that individual, the solution is going to be, well, we'll just move you here. We'll put you in this other class, or we'll put you in this other elementary school. Problem with that is there are bad teachers everywhere.
Yeah.
And so if you don't make sure that the document is portable, meaning the IEP goals, accommodations, services, and placement are easily identified, even if there's a problem with an individual in an IEP team, you have to keep it as objective as possible, focusing on your child's needs according to their disabilities. You have to keep it from becoming personal against a teacher, or personal against a therapist, or against an administrator.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be objective. It's about what the school district is proposing, what you as a member of the IEP team feel about whether or not this IEP addresses your child's needs according to their disabilities. A practice that I do is, when I go to IEP meetings, both for my own child as well as for my clients, I like to establish at some point in the meeting and just remind everyone, well, we recognize that educators go into this profession because they have a heart for children and they want to see their students succeed. We recognize that, and we appreciate the hard work that you do as teachers. We know it can't be easy. And we start with that baseline acknowledgement. Okay?
Yeah.
And it really kind of sets the stage. And I found that teachers at that point will then surprisingly open up and be honest and say, yes, it's been difficult because of little Susie's outbursts. I'm trying to do my best for her, but I'm not able to do for her what she needs when I have an entire other class that may also have their own issues. So I've had teachers just come out and admit, I need more help. I need more support in my classroom. Mm-hmm. What's really important to do during any IEP meeting, anything related to eligibility, the Individuals with Disabilities Act, local screening committee, IEP meetings, you must record them. Depending on what state you live in, you may need to give prior notice up to 24 or sometimes 48 hours. Commonwealth of Virginia, all you got to do is say, I'm going to record, and then press play, press record. Mm-hmm. But other states, you have to give a full 24 to 48 hour notice. The IDEA, the federal law, states that the parent has a right to record. Different states kind of delineate how much time you have to let the school know in advance in order to record. It's really important to record these meetings, especially in cases where you are unsure how the IEP team may react to a request that you have made, or in cases where you're having issues. Even when everything is fine, you should always record, because it's not because you're trying to catch them doing something mm-hmm. wrong. I mean, sometimes, these meetings can go for hours, and I'd be hard pressed to remember everything that's said and done mm-hmm. in an hour. Because condense that into a prior written notice that's mm-hmm. maybe 2 paragraphs long, so the recording is really useful. It also is great to have if you do need to get into some type of legal dispute under the IDEA and file due process.
Partners in Promise believes that all of our educators are trying their best. We're here to try to give parents the tools that they need to advocate when things are not going right. So obviously we're trying to build that collaboration, but of course, your advice and your experience comes in almost when all of those collaborative options have been exhausted, and having those recordings provides tools to parents to advocate where maybe that's not their comfort zone initially.
Well, when it comes to Collaborating. I really like that. Because you have to remember, and sometimes I do have to remind IEP teams that the parents are the first members listed under the IDEA when they are describing what group of individuals constitute an IEP team. Because I know many times parents feel ambushed. I'll get a call after a parent has had an IEP meeting with 20 people from the school, just them, and then like 20 strangers. It's been overwhelming. I tell the parent, well, first member is the parent, and then they have to have an administrator, a gen ed teacher, a special ed teacher, and that's really it.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been in IEP meetings with 4 people.
Yeah.
Of course, those were my IEP meetings. Doesn't seem like that typically happens, but that can occur because that's all that's required, and then anyone else who has any information about the child. So you might have, like in Josiah's case, there would be a speech language pathologist, there'd be a school psychologist, there'd be an occupational therapist. And so I'd have maybe, we averaged about 10 people from the school district in the meetings with us, with myself, which is fine. And then Josiah would be there as well. But for parents who aren't as well-versed or prepared and who are not expecting everyone and their cousin to be in the IEP meeting, it can be very overwhelming. So I think what's important for that parent to realize and remember is I am number one, in a sense. You're the first member of that IEP team. I think it's important to speak in words of collaboration. What can we do to meet this child's need according to their disability? I think it's important not to use certain terms, such as I wouldn't use words like potential. I know that sounds crazy because whenever we speak about children, we talk about their potential. Don't talk about potential. We need to talk about areas of need, how to address them, and where would this student be a year from now if we were to provide him an appropriate IEP. We have to talk about needs of the student according to the disability. The school district may say, well, we don't see an educational impact because the child is advancing from grade to grade and has, passing grades. But we have to go beyond the objective, beyond the subjective and say, okay, you're telling me my child doesn't have a need in this area. I'm telling you it's a diagnosed area of need. We have plenty of documentation. Let's do updated testing. Here's something that's important to do. If the school at any point is saying, we're going to change his IEP, take away these services, take away these goals, we need to put a pause in that and say, well, okay, I hear that these members of the IEP team, the school team, wants to do this. I, as a member of the IEP team, as a parent, I request that prior to making any changes in which services are diminished or removed, or IEP goals are taken away without replacement. So let's say you have a goal that the child will be able to read, or let's say let's keep it easy and numeric, to recite numbers from 1 to 10. If you then get rid of that goal because the child has accomplished or met that goal, your next goal then logically would be the kid will learn the numbers 11 to 20, right? Sometimes schools will say, and we're done. In those cases, what's necessary to do is, as the parent, as number one member of this IEP team, you would like to ask for updated objective testing to be done. I mean, that could look like there's many different instruments out there, such as the Kaufman Test of Educational Achievement, Woodcock-Johnson, the Wyatt. There are a lot of different tests that test both cognitive, verbal, nonverbal, as well as how a student is doing in reading, writing, and mathematics. Those are the core areas that are tested. And before any drastic changes are made to an IEP, there better be more than just anecdotal, teacher thinks this kid is fine, or, well, his grades are okay, because like I said, grades are subjective, incredibly subjective.
If there's anything else, any tips or tricks that you've experienced as a parent, but also as a special education attorney, anything that you would recommend to families to help make this process a little bit smoother?
I would more than document. Well, yes, it is document, but basically what you need to do is you have to take a page out of what BCBAs do for their clients, or any type of specialist or therapist. What you need to do is create a chart. I would list your child's IEP goals, or just if you want to be more generic, areas of need. As you're going through a task, let's say the IEP goal is in the area of executive functioning. So you have like an Excel spreadsheet if you want, or just draw your own chart. You have, we'll initiate a task within 5 minutes. Okay. What you then do is keep the date of when you tried this or when he had a task, be as specific as possible. The task was, I don't know, emptying the dishwasher. How many times did you have to ask the child to do it? Did they do it correctly? And keep a note. And so it's on a spreadsheet, so you could keep track of when you asked a child to do a task. If it is like a work or academic task, try gave math, 10 math questions to do, and how many times you had to prompt, how like many minutes did it take. If it's difficult for you to keep that much of an an organized chart like that, which might be, I mean, there are charts you can find online, but what you can also try to do is just simply record your child every time that they're trying to do an academic or learning task. Just literally take your phone out and record them. That's been very useful for parents, for teachers or school districts who are kind of denying that the student has a certain area of need. You just bring out the recording and you press play, like, this is what we tried to do. You're telling me that you have no issue with this. Explain,
Yeah.
Especially if you have the evidence in hand. So the documentation be as systemic as possible. But I understand that there are adults who also struggle with executive functioning. So when I tell clients to do this, sometimes I get a deer in the headlights and I realize I might be asking them to do more than they're able to. Don't get overwhelmed. Instead, do what you can.
Yeah.
Record them doing it. It'll be time stamped. You'll have a record that you can use to show. Keep all documents in one place. I've had parents who kind of have a general idea of when things were done and when things were said, but they don't know specifics. It's very difficult to make an argument if you can't be specific. So what I recommend doing is building a binder, and I would rather it be encased, meaning when you have just a clump of papers that are just going everywhere, it's hard to make sure that you don't lose pages and that things are organized. Keep a binder and make a sheet at the front of the binder. Either you can write it in or you can do it on a computer, where you say, on June 22nd, we had a IEP meeting and we talked about XYZ. You just write a little blurb. And then you keep your own little timeline and you build it as it goes. If you can, go back through and try to remember when everything was done. The school is required under the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, as well as under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, to keep your child's educational record not only confidential, but to keep it in one place and to give you a copy or access to a copy of it whenever you ask as a parent. Also gives you the ability to challenge and make amendments if you find inaccuracies in the record. These are all important things, especially when you have a child who has behavioral issues in a school and he's being disciplined multiple times. You need to have that data. You need to have those documents. You can just simply write an email to your principal and say, under FERPA, F-E-R-P-A, FERPA, and IDEA, I'm requesting a copy of my child's educational record. And then once you get it, build that binder.
Yeah.
Write down the timeline. It's going to take some work. It's going to take time.
Well, we have an example of a binder that on our website, and obviously there are multiple versions that do and can and exist, and hopefully we'll keep adding to those resources on our website on thepromiseact.org. But I really thank you so much for chatting today. There's so much information, and we might still have to have a whole nother conversation. Anything that you think we should cover in the future?
Well, one thing is that I feel very strongly about is this. Really look towards hope. There's always hope. There is always hope. Even when it seems like, oh my goodness, my child is going to be left behind and he's never going to be able to speak. He can't even tell me he loves me. It's heartbreaking, I know, but there's always hope. I was told my son would never walk. He walks. I mean, not great, but he walks. So there's always hope. And please surround yourself with other hopeful people. Realistic, of course, but hopeful. And I think Partners in Promise is a great example of a group of very hopeful, forward-thinking, special education, military families. We know that there is a potential for solution. We know we can make things better for our children, and that's what we're doing. So that's my, I guess, last word of encouragement.